All right, let's kick off. No doubt we'll have a few more people popping in as I start to run through, but let's make a start. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Zammit. I'm the Innovation and Development Lead with Volunteering Victoria. I've been with Volunteering Victoria for a couple of years now, and prior to that, have spent the better part of 2 decades working with not-for-profit organisations, peak bodies, and also spent some time with government. So I have an understanding of what it's like to sit on both sides of the table. This is the third session in our State of Volunteering research series with a focus on digital and particularly social media today. I'm really pleased to invite Edwina from Jackson Pearse, who will be joining us today to share some of her specific insights and tools and tricks that we can adopt as VIOs in order to streamline what we do and to better engage volunteers. In terms of today and the structure, so we'll start off with an overview of the key findings and insights from the SOVR, and then start to hone in on some of the specific insights that have come through in relation to digital and social media. I'll then move over to Edwina, who will share her intelligence and ideas about what we can be doing differently. And then we can open up to some broader questions and then move into a number of breakout rooms where we can start to delve into what does this look like in practical terms for our organisations to become more digitally flexible and ready for what is coming down the pipe. Before I formally kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Melissa, we can go to the next slide, please. So for those who haven't come across the State of Volunteering report, our report, 2025 report, was launched in May this year, which seems like not that long ago and yet quite a couple of months ago now. There's a QR code on the screen that will take you directly to the Volunteering Victoria website where you can access the full report. There are also a number of snapshots that have been released specifically around youth and culturally and linguistically diverse that takes the insights from the report and synthesizes them into more bite-sized chunks that can be used across a variety of purposes. So going straight into the State of Volunteering report, this was a mammoth piece of work, which I think is known to many of the people in this room who either took part or promoted or in fact have come across the report and have actually had a bit of a read. So one of the key things to note is the last time we did the SOVR was 2020 and the research was conducted in March, which as you can appreciate was not probably the best time to do that piece of work as COVID had well and truly started to rear. And obviously that impacted on the research and the numbers that came through in terms of volunteering effort and participation. So we made that commitment to undertake SOVR in 2024. And as part of that process, we really took a reflective exercise, which was to look at the lay of the land. Sorry, Melissa, next slide, please. To look at the lay of the land. And that was really around what is the existing research. So all of the other states and territories, or the vast majority, had undertaken their SOVR the year prior or at least 6 months prior. So there was a wealth of data and insights that we were able to gather from the other SOVRs, but also looking at what else has been done within the broader environment in relation to research about volunteering, and then also considering the research that we've conducted over the last 5 years. So our sector surveys, our member surveys, and other commission pieces of work to really get a lay of the land of what is happening in Victoria. That informed the public survey, which was modelled on the methodology used for the other SOVRs. And as part of that public survey, we surveyed 2,500 people. And that was really looking at a cross-section of Victorians to get a sense of what their experience of volunteering has been in the last year and what we can be seeing in terms of trends and insights. In addition to that, there was a volunteer leaders survey. We had 320 leaders complete that survey. And this time around in 2025, we made a really strong investment in understanding what does that volunteering experience look like from the mouths of volunteers and leaders of volunteers. And so unlike 2020, where focus groups were not possible, we heavily invested in focus groups and did 24 focus groups in about 4.5 months in the latter part of 2024. And that certainly was a very big piece of work and something that I was leading for VV. So I can talk to some of those insights as we go through this session. All of that information was brought together and provided to a team at UWA who sat down and did some incredibly rigorous analysis to understand how does that qual fit the quant and what can we learn? What are some of these macro trends that we're seeing coming down the line? And that led to the report being launched in May. Next slide, please. So there are a number of key insights that emerged. Next slide, Melissa. And one of the key findings is that 58.9% of Victorians were volunteering in that 2024 period. That equates to about 3.3 million Victorians to age 15 plus. And when we think about it in terms of hours, it's about 222 hours per year, or about approx kind of that 18 and a half hours per month. If you were to look at it from purely an economic perspective and just taking it as, the median minimum wage, 25th percentile, you'd be looking at about a $27 billion contribution. Now, there's lots of contestation around whether or how you assess the economic value. In 2020, we used another model. As part of this report, we didn't focus on the economic valuation as a core focus. We really wanted to focus on what are some of those key issues that are facing the sector and are facing volunteers. And so that is where this report focuses. And certainly if you are interested in looking at that economic analysis, I do recommend going back to that 2020 report to see how that's being calculated. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the rate of volunteering in Victoria, that rate is actually up from 42.1% mid-COVID. So we are seeing a recovery, which is promising. And I think many of us have seen that across our organisations. However, when we compare it to the national rate, we are sitting behind, and that national rate is 64.3%. So it's clear that we are still recovering to a certain extent, but there are also other factors at play. One of the key things that we saw was that formal volunteering has dropped, and it's dropped considerably. So it's dropped from 84% back in 2020 down to 53%. And we've seen a rise in informal volunteering, and that has shot up from 60% up to 78%. In real terms, when we look at that difference between the national rate and the Victorian rate, we're equating that to about a 300,000 volunteer difference. And that is about 68 million hours. So it is quite considerable. We also have seen 200,000 less formal volunteers as compared to SOVR 2020. So what does this actually mean? Next slide. So we know that volunteering is not declining, but it is transitioning. And certainly we're seeing that transition move to informal volunteering. People are still giving their time, but they're wanting to do it in ways that resonate with them. The rise of informal, flexible, and online volunteering is really clear. And that came across quite strongly both in the quant research and in the qual research. People are far more protective of their time. We've seen cost of living coming through quite strongly, but also a significant rise in online volunteering as compared to 2020. And there's a whole host of reasons behind that, which we will touch on, and Edwina will also touch on as part of her presentation. But what people are seeking is more flexible volunteering that orients to what they need, what they're looking for at times that suit them. As an example, the idea of micro-volunteering came through with one of our focus groups. It was actually focused on online volunteering. One of the volunteers talking about the reasons that she loves online volunteering is the ability to contribute 20 minutes. She might have 20 minutes free between dropping off the kids and attending to something else, that she can log on and do a couple of small tasks that actually help to add value, but also provide her with that sense of giving, that sense of contributing, but also knowing that she's making an impact. Formal structures and supports are failing to keep pace with these shifts. And again, we have heard this through other points of research that we've conducted over the last couple of years. But this did come through quite strongly in the research that the balance between the need for formality and what volunteers are looking for is actually coming to a bit of a head. Volunteers are very much wanting to understand the impact of what they do. So, what came through quite strongly was the need to not only do something that feels good or the idea of helping, but actually understanding what that helping looks like in practice. So, what is the impact that I am contributing to? To what extent have we helped to alleviate particular social issues? To what extent am I contributing to an environmental cause? These were some of the insights that started to really come through both the focus groups and particularly the focus groups, but that idea of impact was a really big one. And also, as we're well aware as a sector and speaking to the converted, behind every volunteer is someone making it happen. So we know that there is considerable pressure on the sector. We are trying to do more with less, but we are also grappling with an aging workforce and an aging workforce of volunteer leaders. The average age of volunteer leaders coming through the volunteer leader survey was 54 years of age, with approximately 40% from memory working in the sector for 12 plus years. So that is a significant contribution, but it also raises issues around succession planning. Next slide, please. So, when we talk about digital, what exactly do we mean? And I think it's really easy for us to immediately gravitate towards social media. It's perhaps the most common form of digital, but there's really a limitation in the possibilities if we were to just stick with social media. And so we are talking about systems and processes. So that is the likes of our client relationship management systems or our databases for both our volunteers, but also how we engage with clients or service users or members. It's also the volunteer management and matchings, everything from recruitment through to that matching process. It's technology, it's apps, it's tools, it's AI, which obviously all of us have pretty much heard of, the likes of your chat GPT and other types of tools. However, there is a much broader suite of opportunities out there that we may not be tapping into. And the likes of digital services. So again, more and more of us are working in the cloud. There are a range of other services that can help streamline what we do. Automation is a subset of this. Again, there is some untapped potential about how we can use this within VIOs in order to then harness that spare time for more human-centered practice and work. Digital culture and attitudes is another component. And in speaking with Jeff in preparation for this session, one of the comments that he shared with me is, what some of the research is showing is that for young people and for, for certain groups of young people, the digital world can be more real than the real world. So more life is spent in the digital world, with the real world being an extension. And so how we think about communication becomes really, really important. So we know that there are digital personas. There's different ways that we communicate online. There are avatars. There's different language that we use. And all of this starts to come into play when we think about digital. There's also hybrid ways of working, playing, and giving. And we see that all the time in terms of Wi-Fi and appliances and how we intersect with social media and other things. But how we think about that in terms of giving is another area where we need to start to put some attention. Next slide, please. So, what did SOVR tell us? So, firstly, one of the key things that did come through is that digital is actually working reasonably well for young people, working really well for cold, and also volunteers with a mental health issue. So they are more likely to look at online as their prime source of recruitment. And social media is an important part of that, but it's not all it's not the major source. So the research did talk about the fact that many people still find their volunteer opportunities through word of mouth. They are looking at this through family and friends, and also potentially, if they have been a service user, 20% of service users are likely to then volunteer. So we know that social media is only part of it. Likewise with volunteer websites. So they are used, but they're not used to the greatest extent that they could be. And again, it's about finding people where they're at rather than expecting people to be channeled to a particular area. Nearly a quarter of current volunteers intend to be volunteering more in 3 years. So there is scope for growth here, which is incredibly promising. And we know that 1 in 5 people who don't currently volunteer think they might volunteer in 3 years' time. So there's a real question mark for us about how do we tap into that latent potential? Where are these individuals playing, giving, working? And how do we think about tapping into their latent interest in language and in ways that suit them? Next slide, please. As mentioned, online versus in-person volunteering has increased. So we have seen a significant rise in online volunteering as compared to 2020. And of those volunteering from home or online, approximately 22% wanted to do more. 55% were pretty happy with what they were currently doing, and 22.8% wanted to do less volunteering. So we're seeing a little bit of that either side, and then quite a bit of that same in the middle. We know that online volunteering is strongest in metro areas. And again, there is still an important point to note that it's not necessarily all or nothing. So, in terms of how people want to seek connection, people are interested in online volunteering, but they still do want human connection as well. And so, there is a preference of roughly an equal spread between wanting to volunteer on my own, wanting to volunteer with others, and then those individuals who are happy to do both and would like to do both. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the barriers, the success of digital volunteering, as we would all expect, really depends heavily on the user experience. If the systems are incredibly complex for both volunteer leaders and for volunteers, that can actually dissuade people from volunteering. So we need systems that are intuitive, that are flexible, that are adaptive, and we still need that human connection in order to be able to navigate, particularly when we talk about older volunteers, for example, who are going to be less digitally confident. Leaders of volunteers reflected that digital tools could be a way to streamline onboarding, reduce paperwork, and improve communication. So it's clear that we are starting to think about it, which is great. It does mean, though, that there is further work that we need to be looking at as a sector. We know that in rural areas, digital literacy and connectivity are additional barriers. And so, again, this has to be part of our thinking when we're moving forward. VIOs are slow to identify digital technology as a top priority. And in some ways, that's unsurprising. We know that risk, compliance, legal, and other requirements are really coming up at that front and center of attention. And so that does present an issue about how much attention and planning are we putting towards that digital readiness and really harnessing that ability to utilize resources in a more effective way and therefore provide that attention to human centeredness. What is clear is those who are successful are using technology to simplify volunteering and invest in more intuitive, accessible, and accessible tools supported with training where needed. Next slide, please. So, in terms of other considerations, digital volunteering is making participation more accessible for people who are time poor, geographically isolated, or living with health or mobility challenges. We know that young people and cold people are particularly benefiting from online volunteering. Again, we know that older people are experiencing challenges and that this does need to be overcome. In terms of some of the challenges, online channels for recruitment might suffer from a lower conversion rate. So while there might be a lot of interest generated through Google searches, etc., we need to see how that's actually translating into practice. And again, how do we harness where people are spending their time and using this in a more intuitive way? Next slide, please. Importantly, there's a lot that SOVR doesn't tell us. So, for example, we don't know the level of investment that VIOs are currently making. So, we don't know how much time is put towards planning, if this is even on the radar, if is any budget associated with building digital capability within organizations and investment in tools and systems, resourcing or collaborations. We don't know the level of confidence of volunteer leaders managing a hybrid volunteer workforce or, in fact, a fully online workforce. That level of confidence of volunteer leaders when it comes to tech is also really important. And again, this is an area that warrants more attention. There are concerns in moving to a more digital way of operating, but what are those? Now, we can hypothesize what some of those might be,
Yes,
particularly about leaving people
keep going.
behind. However, how do we bridge that gap and what do we need to mitigate? And the difference between VIOs with a paid workforce and volunteers as compared to majority or mostly volunteer driven, are the challenges and opportunities the same or are they different? And then who's leading the way and what can we learn from those individuals and organisations? Next slide, please. Really quickly, and I'll provide the links as resources as part of a final slide. There are some insights that we can learn outside of SOVR. So when we look at the Info Exchange data for Australia, 62% of not-for-profits are less than satisfied with their application of technology. 3 out of 4 believe their data quality is not good enough for reporting and analytics. And the following stat, with over 75% of organisations actively engaged in the use of AI, which is 3 times more than 2023, particularly surprised me. And I think a reflection for our sector is how closely does that statistic reflect the organisations and programs that we work with? And is that an accurate reflection for volunteer heavy organisations? In the UK, there was some specific research in relation to volunteering that was commissioned. And some of the key issues that emerged in relation to that are issues that we are also familiar with. So the idea of lack of funding for tools, a skills gap, so a lack of that very technical knowledge, but also how you can apply some of the amazing learnings that are coming through to your workplace and to your organization. Change fatigue, having to maintain digital and non-digital tools to ensure cross-demographic inclusion. And again, that came through in focus groups where a sports club talked about having, manual recording systems for scoring and also using an iPad concurrently because of a lack of trust by older volunteers and, concerns around fraud. So again, we are seeing how do you manage that hybrid and how do you manage some of those tensions, and also a low conversion rate from interest to volunteering. Next slide, please. Finally, the UK Charity Digital Skills Report is a really interesting one where they do talk about the level of interest and also the level of digital capability of not-for-profits of a wide variety of sizes. And having a look at that, 24% of organisations are at the earliest curious stage with digital. And that means that there is an interest, but not necessarily the capability there. 32% are at the next starting out stage, and 44% describe themselves as advancing or advanced with a strategy for digital. And we know that some of the key issues, again, there's some similarities here around using AI tools in everyday work has been identified as a key challenge, keeping up to date with emerging tech trends, investing in and resourcing digital effectively, and conducting and acting on user research. So these are some trends that we're seeing abroad, and no doubt we would be seeing similar trends here. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Edwina from Jackson Pearse, who will be talking us through some very specific insights about how to unlock digital potential. And it's my pleasure, Edwina, to hand over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and thank you everyone for having me today. So as mentioned, my name's Edwina and I am from a company called Jackson Pearse. We're a policy and communications consultancy. So we're not a digital consultancy, but we approach digital, I guess we're a digital first consultancy in that we don't separate what we do into digital and non-digital because we work in a digital world. So it informs, in fact, every kind of bit of work that we do. But in terms of today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and keep things, I've got 10 to 15 minutes. I'm hoping to explore a few digital tools and really talk about messaging in what is now a predominantly digital environment and look at messaging through the lens of what really is working well right now. And I guess my goal for this session is to give you some new ideas, practical tips, and maybe some just inspiration going forward. So isn't particularly theoretical, but hoping it can spark a few different ideas for you. So next slide.
That's not where I thought we were.
Oh, sorry. Can everyone hear me? I just got a little bit of, yeah, cool. And also I did want to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting today and pay our respects to, or my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly note any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us online today. So I'm coming at you from the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'm down on the Mornington Peninsula, so that's where I'm coming from. So feel free to drop through your country on the chat. I always like seeing where people are from, but I suspect we're all sharing common ground today. Next slide, please. So why does digital matter for everyone? And it's I was interested to hear Jess talk about the slides or the stats in particular around AI and how many organizations or people are using AI. And I would think we're getting pretty close to absolute saturation on that perspective. And if you don't think your organization or your team or your friends are using AI, you'd probably be very surprised at how many people do it now to even just send an email. It's become so integrated into how we communicate. So I think I think it's probably even progressed further since those last set of stats were done. Excuse me. So digital strategies, I think a lot of people get nervous around them and think they're for people that have very deep pockets and endless resources for funding digital tools and operations. But realistically, they're not just for well-resourced teams. Small groups can really use what's available for free. There's simple tools that you can access that allow you to punch above your weight metaphorically as an organization. And so you can engage with these kind of free and simple tools if you're a small organization, you're not sure where to start. On the other side of things, large not-for-profits, volunteer organizations can use, I guess, more sophisticated, progressed systems to really scale and personalize their messaging effectively. Obviously, and it's not something I think we've gone into in this session, but one thing is when you're dealing with a volunteer database and that amount of data, one thing you do need to be cognizant of is, of course, how to operate within the context of privacy legislation, because that's a whole other layer to digital that I think can be scary, but is also really important to be conscious of as you are reevaluating how you might want to connect with your supporters in the digital world. You want to do that in a way that respects their privacy and because that also obviously builds trust, and trust is really at the core of a lot of what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. Cool. So thank you very much. So since 2020, expectations and habits have changed. So I think as organizations, we really need to adapt, or, being very frank, we risk losing relevance and certainly losing reach. And I think we've got to kind of get over this idea that digital is a side project or a bolt-on, because it needs to be embedded across all of your programs, processes, and relationships. So it's not doing what we've always done and then going, well, how can we do this in a digital space? It's integrating digital into that whole kind of model of how we operate. So, and as we know, if we can do this well, digital inclusion, makes access and participation possible for more people than ever before. So, and that's regardless of location, regardless of circumstances. So I would argue that, digital isn't just about being online. It's about bringing people together and making everyone feel involved, no matter where they are. At the end of the day, it's really about authentic storytelling and personalization, because although we're using these systems that, bring our data together, and we're looking at lots of different, there's the data itself is huge, but what we actually want to do is make people feel like we're talking to them one-on-one. We might be using these digital tools and systems to, bring things together and get these insights. But what we're actually trying to do is create an environment for one-on-one communication and storytelling, and, using digital to make that happen. So what we need to do is kind of, and I think AI is a big thing here, we need to work out how that can be used in a way that's advantageous to create these human touch points in the work that we do. And I think, communication might become easier with, the actual act of communication itself might become easier, but the nature of that communication and making sure it feels meaningful, making sure it feels personal, is actually more important than ever in a world that's become very, very noisy, I guess. So next slide, please. As mentioned before, digital platforms give us access to groups that might otherwise slip through the cracks or be difficult to reach. And, it's critical for those of us that have, or want to reach people in rural areas. We know people are really time poor, so digital can be a great way of interrupting someone's life. And I'll go back to that idea of interruption in a little bit, in a way that allows them to use digital as a tool to volunteer in a way that works for them. So if someone's time poor, like, we can create those 10-minute micro moments for volunteering time. That's, digital is a great way to do that. So with the right setup, really, your organization can work to be more inclusive, more responsive, and more appealing by utilizing digital in a way that feels personalized again. Next slide, please. So what we talk about, and I talked about interruption before, is and I should say I come from a background, I should have probably said this at the start, I come from a background working with big charities in their brand and communications and digital spaces. So, and I think, again, it's sometimes organizations can fall into a trap where we're all doing great work, we're all doing meaningful work, we're all doing work that will have an impact. So the nature of that work is sometimes we expect people to come to us because what we're doing is worthy or interesting to us. We think that people will come of their own volition to find us. Realistically, people are so consumed with a busy everyday life that, as I said before, is increasingly getting noisier with all the different ways that communication is presented to them. So instead of expecting our volunteer audiences to come to us, we need to go and meet them where they are. So our digital efforts or our digital communications really need to be woven into somebody's everyday life, and not as something that we need to opt into their life as opposed to them opting into our message, if that makes sense. So we need to connect with them in their everyday spaces. And I think, if we use platforms like regular chat groups, video calls, you know, if we create these spaces and bring them to people where they're at, then that really does go a long way in cementing the relationship that you may have with your audiences. And I guess the thing you want to do about that, it's always so important to have that understanding of where the people that you want to communicate with are. You really need to kind of listen to find out where they are. And what you want to do is meet them in a way that doesn't feel like you're intruding. You need to find a natural and authentic way to find, you know, like they need to come across you incidentally on Facebook or on one of the other social media platforms, or it just needs to feel, you might be using these amazing digital tools behind the scenes to create these moments, but the people receiving these moments don't want to feel as though that's an unnatural interaction. They don't want to feel as though their space is being interrupted or intruded, but you have to do it in a way that's natural. And again, there are lots of digital tools that allow you to kind of go and find people where they are. And speaking of digital tools, I'm going to do an amazing digital tool here that involves me putting myself back on a charger, because I just realized my charger's about to run out. And we can go to the next slide while that happens. So in terms of reaching people where they're at, oops, apologies, everyone. My slides are coming with me because I still live in an analog world as well. In terms of people, reaching people where they're at, as I said, it really starts with listening and observing where your audience is and customizing the communications tools that you might use to speak in different tones of voice and use them for different, you know, each digital channel. And we talk about the digital channels, like they're tools to reach your audiences again. So, but the different tools, as we know, can be used for different purposes in different ways. And we need to customize our communications to fit each of these platforms' tones, their strengths. For instance, you know, WhatsApp, that's a really useful tool if you want to send something urgent. TikTok is much more trend driven. You can do challenges that might increase your engagement with a certain particular sort of program or campaign you're running. Instagram's great for how-tos and it's very visual and behind the scenes. And Facebook is more chatty, you know, like and you can create these spaces where it's almost like catching up with someone for a coffee. And you can create closed spaces for you to do that. But I think what's really important is that no single way of messaging will fit all of those platforms. So you need to adapt your style for each platform, being aware of its strengths and weaknesses. Next slide, please. So I bang on about this a lot as a communicator, but more important than anything else, I think, is the value of your impact story. So when it comes to volunteers, it's really important that people these days are able to see how their time and energy has changed lives in a positive way. And that kind of connection to what they're giving you is really, in terms of ensuring the retention of your volunteers, ensuring they keep on being engaged, they really need to see what impact their time and energy has had. And it's not, we're kind of moving away from that. People either might volunteer on a day or might, you know, when we're talking about fundraising, they might fundraise and then as an organization, you go off and use their funds in a particular way and, you know, hear from them again. That's kind of very old school. And what you really want to do is make sure it's a two-way relationship between an organization and a volunteer. So, you know, digital tools, no matter how clever they are, and we all know they're incredibly clever. I don't necessarily understand the mechanics of them, but I know I use them to make my life a lot easier. But at the end of the day, digital tools are just platforms. And what really, really matters is that we use them to showcase real stories. And we want to show impact and highlight impact in a way, and it might be across a newsletter, across social media, in a way that makes your volunteer audience feel proud, feel like you value them as an organization, and feels motivated. So like if you keep having those small wins and you feel like you're a part of them and can contribute to them, you're going to keep being involved in an organization. And that's not something that's specific to just digital tools. That's something that, you know, you can do across all of your communications. Digital channels are just one way to turn that idea of recognition and community-wide celebration into something. So messaging is most powerful when volunteers see evidence of their contribution, and it's not just in a private, you know, letter from the CEO or a thank you. It's things, you know, digital channels are great for sharing those success stories and sharing that impact story across a really wide network of people. So you can get a lot of people to feel that sense of value and sense of partnership without having to go super specific. So, but it's really, I think, a story that I always tell, and many of you will be familiar with this. You know, if you donate blood, you will get a text message showing where and when that blood that you've donated is being used. And it's that, you know, real-time recognition of the fact that you've done something that now will help someone else. And that's just a digital tool that's facilitated that exchange of information. But again, ultimately, the effectiveness of any digital tools or messaging come down to that kind of sense of connection. So again, every message that you put out on digital channels should really reinforce the value of each volunteer and celebrate them. So next slide, please. So in terms of messaging, it's been never, you know, it's really where it's never harder than now to cut through the noise. And that's, we know that on social, not only someone might be on, you know, 3 or 4 screens at once, but they scroll, you know, in seconds. You've got probably like between 3 to 7 seconds to make a connection or an impact. But what we do know is that people stop when there is an authentic story or when there's a really strong emotional hook. And that's not necessarily, that can be through music, that can be through visuals. And the other thing is when you present something that moves people or sparks something within them on social media, you need to make sure you also have a clear call to action, because otherwise you've created this emotional response and you've left them with nowhere or, you know, no path to take that emotional response. So it's really important to not only create that emotional response, but give your volunteer audience a clear path of what to do with what they're feeling now. We would say, I mean, with all messaging, regardless of digital or not, it's important to repeat it in lots of different ways and in lots of different channels, because the more familiar those messages become, people, you know, the more familiarity usually equates to support. And, you know, I'm not talking about oversaturation, but if you can reach people in lots of different ways, whether it be, you know, digital or analog, then, you know, you're norming that work that you do, and people trust what they see a lot. So it's important to keep repeating the messages, just change slightly how they're told depending on the channel. All right, next slide, please. So just in terms of, you know, if you were to take one thing from me today, actually, it would be don't try to be everywhere all at once, and definitely don't post the same thing across different channels. You know your audience, work out which audience that you have, which is on which platform, and post regularly, and don't be afraid to show the personality of your organization. You know, I think not only will the people that you're trying to reach appreciate the effort that you're putting into maintaining the relationships, from a purely digital and technical point of view, the algorithms will also like that continual exchange of information, and they will reward you for it. So in terms of the tone, you know, social tools especially, it's a place for real conversations. I think Jess mentioned before that a lot of people primarily live their lives in a digital environment now. So it's not about a fake conversation. Social is a place for real conversations. You know, if you're talking to a volunteer, make sure you're listening to what their feedback is, what they say, because peer-to-peer interaction, as we all know, is gold when it comes for, you know, building trust and creating reach. So the other thing I would say is that whatever messages you put online should sound recognizably true to you as an organization, wherever it appears, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's an email communication, it has to sound authentic to your organization. And I think when you build that brand and when you have a clear voice, you just have to be careful, because if you start sort of talking in a different way, it can really sort of violate or undermine that trust that you build. So, I mean, as a very quick and dirty tip, aim for language that's easy to grasp, you know, have it supported by visuals, and always make sure you put the person in the center of your story. So in terms of common, I might just flick forward a few slides now to common messaging mistakes, if that's okay. There we go. So common messaging mistakes and how to avoid them. So I think I mentioned it before, but falling into that trap of sharing the same content across all channels. It feels now, in this era where everything is super hyper personalized and people feel like they're talking directly to you, just cutting and pasting and sharing across everything does feel a little stale. And I appreciate that's hard when you don't have infinite resources to keep writing and repurposing information, but that is an area that AI can help. But I will always caution with AI, just double check. Even everyone uses AI. I think we all know that people use AI. I think, you know, there are tells now that you can sense when something's been written by AI. But AI is a great tool if you are its master, but don't let it, you know, don't let it control you. So if you you know, I think learning how to prompt AI and work with the AI carefully is a really important skill that we're all going to need to talk about and learn into the future. AI wrangling is something that's very important. And when you use it in a way and you teach it how to write like you and speak like you, it can actually make your life a lot easier. But it's still, we have to remember this has happened so quickly. Like, you know, this technological automated future has come upon us more quickly than any of us would have thought, and it's still in its infancy. And I don't know about you, but I've got children, and in their infancy they still make a lot of dumb mistakes, and I still make a lot of dumb mistakes as a parent. So we just have to be conscious that we're learning together here. So it's going to make mistakes, you're going to make mistakes, that's okay, but you've got to, it's not ready to go just yet. It can't be left to its own devices just yet. And what I will say again, and I always say this, you can chase trends, you can get a CEO who's never mastered Teams to try and do a TikTok video, but it will just scream of inauthenticity and cringe. So like, make sure the tone of voice that you're speaking in your digital channels, again, is true to you, and never make people do something they feel a discomfort with on social media because, you know, it's a trend. Again, research where your audience are and who is appropriate in your organization to speak to those audience in the right form. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm rushing through here. I'm trying to get through it. So apologies if I'm going at a million miles a minute. And this one I'll just touch on because Jess, I think you touched on this really well. But there's barriers, as we all know, but those barriers also inspire us to come up with smart solutions. So I know that even embracing simple digital tools can feel really daunting, but, you know, go step by step, embrace the training that is often available to you with these digital tools. They often provide how-tos. YouTube is a great, you know, reference point for learning about new technologies. You know, embrace the training. When you learn something, help the person next to you get a hang of it. I mean, it's kind of the same in the analog world. When something new comes up, you get your head around it, you do your training, you do your homework, you learn about it. Digital's no different to that. You know, automate what you can. Again, like, that's a lot of back-end stuff. The back-end stuff's not there to take over the day-to-day that you do and that you love, but it's there to make that life easier for you. And if it's used in a way that is helpful and how it's intended, it will actually give you more time to do the connection piece that as humans is our, you know, unique skill and can't be replicated by a machine. So, I mean, I would say that the best kind of digital is the kind that disappears into the background, which lets people like all of you do the things that you're good at and the things that you love. So it shouldn't replace the good things about our job, but it hopefully will replace some of the tedious things. Next slide, please. So just some practical tools again, and I don't need to go into all of them, but hopefully I think this presentation or the recording of today will share this. So I just wanted to put on screen some of the things. Some of you might be thinking, hold on a second, I'm the head of digital at my organization, but I'm also the head of volunteers and I'm the treasurer and I'm the administrator. I just don't have time for all of that. Here is just some practical tools here that you can check out that, that, you know, you really could hopefully make your lives a lot easier, and that don't have to be daunting in terms of they're essentially set up for not-profits, for volunteer organizations, with some tools that can get you started on your digital journey, regardless of how, you know, far progressed in that you are. And one of the things I love, and we used to do this all the time at I was at the Cancer Council for a long time, was, you know, the volunteers that I worked with always had the best stories, and they always had that connection to cause that was hard to replicate as, you know, someone who worked in the organization, but at times wasn't directly affected by it. So, you know what? Getting someone to flick their phone around, assuming they're not on an old Nokia without a phone, without a screen. I don't know if they exist anymore, but anyway, you know, get them to get their phone, turn the camera around and get them to do a 30-second clip about why they love working with your organization. And you know what? Straight away, you've got a great piece of collateral that can be shared on your channels that will hopefully motivate people, because they'll see someone maybe like themselves and what they've benefited, what they've got from working with you guys. So that's just a very quick thing that you can do. So next slide, please. And I promise you, I don't have much to go, but Jess asked me what was happening, like what's the next next big thing going on with the internet. And I said, well, the internet's kind of ending. Is that that's where we're going. So this is a little bit out of left field, but I think it's what we have to be prepared for. And again, it goes hand in hand with AI and automation, because they are absolutely changing everything. So AI and automation are transforming the online spaces, because now what we see and what we read, a lot of it is created by algorithms, not people. So we're getting to this, and it's something called the dead internet theory, but in the future, you know, genuine human interactions are going to be swamped by automated content, and it's going to be harder to find and build real relationships. So what we see online, most of the communication that will happen online, a lot of it will be from bot to bot. So it will be from AI to AI, and a lot of that information, none of us will interact with it. It will be happening behind the scenes, and authentic human-made content will become increasingly rare. So what do we do in this world that the digital world is flooded with automated noise? How do we cut through with our stories? And I think more than anything, what this shows is that for volunteer organizations, again, this shift to bot talking to bot, to these communications not even involving humans, again, it really highlights to me the urgent need to prioritize genuine engagement and real connections. And what does that mean? I'll go to the next slide now. What does the end of the internet mean for the volunteering world? Well, we know that trusted relationships and transparent communication are increasingly vital. And we know that that is especially true as the internet becomes full of just automated content and bot-to-bot content. So I think what this actually does is present a cool opportunity, and a unique opportunity for volunteer and not-for-profit organizations to really anchor themselves in human connection. And what we need to do is, I think there is no doubt a digital overload. There is no doubt we need to use digital tools to, optimize our operations. But what we also really, really, really need to lean into at the moment is empathy and creating meaningful stories and stories that have a tangible impact. And I think, and it's funny to say this, of course, in a session where we're talking about digital tools and the importance of the internet, all of those things. I think as that noise increases, though, it's gonna be the value of in-person relationships and genuine social contribution. We can, as volunteer or not-for-profit organizations, in this really kind of fragmented, noisy digital world, we can become cultural anchors and we can connect to people in a way that does feel meaningful. So, I mean, I would always say you've got to invest in building relationships, both offline and online. And I think it's important to focus on transparency and use technology to deepen relationships, but absolutely not replace human connection. People may feel disconnected. I think what this really, it just, again, it magnifies the importance of never going to a fully, I guess, online model, but making sure your communications continues to feel like, you're in a hybrid engagement, or continues to also affect how people feel in their analog lives. So I guess traditional outreach channels may be less effective as the internet only speaks to itself, and that when bots and AI just, have a conversation without involving humans, what you can do is stand out by emphasizing trust and human-led connections. So even if it's in a digital channel, the human-led connections are super important. And again, I'll reiterate it, use technology to support, not substitute, those genuine relationships. Be ready to adapt to how communications is changing, but never lose focus of community, on your communities, on personal storytelling, and on face-to-face engagement, which I'll go to the next slide because that's really the end. But there you go. That's all I want to say. I want to thank you for your time today and your curiosity. And again, remember that digital is about relationships as much as technology, and that no matter how many digital tools we have at our disposal, they will actually never replace authentic human connection, and they actually should facilitate that and amplify that for us if used appropriately. And that's me. Sorry. Deep breath now.
Thanks so much, Edwina.
No
That
problem.
was a wealth of information, and reading the comments.
Oh God, yes. I just saw that. There you go.
No, that's okay. No, the comments, again, people have been sharing some really interesting insights about how they utilize digital and also some of the risks that come with that.
Yeah,
And
cool.
I'm quite mindful, we have hit 12:59 on the dot. So that's okay, Edwina. You were on a roll, so that's okay. So what I'm mindful of, noting that we were going to wrap up at 1, I will suggest that we run through only for about another 5 or 10 minutes for those who can stay on. Rather than going to a breakout session, I'm just mindful, perhaps one of the other ways that we can do it, and Melissa, I'll just get you to pop through to the next slide. Again, another one. I'm going to skip through the general SOVR implications. Let's go through. Yep, skip. And let's go straight to the questions. And this PowerPoint will be made available post the session for everyone to engage with. I might, Melissa, get you to go back one slide. I'll just talk through. So there are some further resources that have been shared in the PowerPoint slide. So the research that I did refer to earlier, both the Australian and the UK research, there are links there if you'd like to delve into that in a little bit more detail. For those who haven't across, there is a digital transformation hub that has been made available by Info Exchange with the support of a number of philanthropic organisations. It is worth having a look. It has been designed to be quite bite-sized and very specific to NFPs, so that may be something you'd like to have a look at post this session. And if we move to the final slide, One back, Melissa. Thank you. So rather than moving to breakout, just because I know that we are now encroaching on the last few minutes, there are two questions that I wanted us to pose and think about as a group. There's been a lot that we've covered in the last hour. And I think one of the first questions that VV are particularly keen to understand is, where does your program currently sit when it comes to digital confidence and adoption? And you might have heard me talk about a couple of the terms that was used in that UK Digital Charities report, and I'll touch on what those definitions were. So when they've talked about curious, they've said we have some digital basics in place, such as social media or remote working, and see opportunities to do more. So that's where organisations have said, yep, I'm sitting at the curious stage. Starting out, we're developing our use of digital, but don't yet have a strategic approach. Advancing, digital is part of our strategy, and we're investing in technology and skills, but we've not embedded this yet. Or advanced, digital is fully embedded in our organisational strategy and our ways of working. I would love if you could pop into the chat whether you think your program or organisation sits at that curious, starting out, advancing, or advanced stage. And if you're not sure, you could say you're not sure. Okay, so we've got a couple of people saying advancing, starting out. Yep, another for advancing, another for curious. Yep. Okay, so what we're starting to see is that organisations are at various stages within this process. And so keep popping those through in the responses. The second question that I wanted to pose for reflection, again, taking into account some of the insights that we've learned, but also the fact that of all of the content that came through SOVR, one of my reflections, having been quite intimately involved in running the SOVR project, was that there's a lot we don't know about the digital confidence of organisations and the readiness and where there does need to be additional support. And so in framing that, one of the questions when I was speaking with Jeff, our CEO, in relation to this session was, in my role within the organisation as innovation and development lead, there's a whole host of business development and relationships and opportunities that VV can pursue. And so where could we put our attention, both as Volunteering Victoria and yourselves, to build digital capability in the next 24 months? So, what new products or business development would you like to see Volunteering Victoria explore? What are some of those blockers in reflecting on this conversation that you feel would warrant some attention? And feel free to pop into the chat. Okay, so we've got one response here. Would love to have a COP or research insights about effective volunteer management systems. Great. What else? I'm interested in AI automation for lots of the admin functions. Excellent. If you see me leaning in, it's just so I can read these comments. Anyone else? All right. Final for the close. Edwina, any final insight that you have about really practical strategies that very, very small VIOs can take away? We have a lot of organisations that are predominantly volunteer run, with very few or very finite paid resources. If there was one thing that an organisation could do right away, what would you pick as your number one?
I would find it, well, I mean, this is my comms hat on, I guess, versus my purely digital hat, but I think find the three things or key messages that you want your people to feel or do. What are the three most important things you want your volunteer audiences to hear? And then you can work out how to share those across different channels. But unless you've got your own story or brand narrative straight, then having all the digital tools in the world won't actually matter, because you've just got to have those kind of three key things that you want to share. And then don't treat digital like don't treat digital like a separate add-on to your organization. Get your communication story, your three key messages right, and then you can figure out how to use digital to share them. But if you don't have that worked out, then you'll always be chasing your tail.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for providing your time today for this session. We have run a little bit over, but
That's my
okay.
fault. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Edwina. You were incredibly passionate. I didn't have the heart to cut you off.
Oh.
So that is also partly my doing as facilitator. If anyone does have any further questions for Edwina, or of course for us as VV in relation to this session, please pop them in the chat. We will keep a copy of this chat and we can come back to you privately in regards to some of those questions. As mentioned, this PowerPoint presentation will be made available, so don't feel like you've had to madly type away. If you feel like you've missed anything, you'll have the opportunity to re-listen to it, and also to get some of that additional data that we weren't able to put some time to. I'd like to provide a very special thanks to Melissa and Jen in the team, who have been working in the background to make sure that this has happened, and that this has been as seamless as it has been. And a thank you also to Sarah, who has also been involved in helping to pull together this presentation today. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully this has provided some light bulb moments for you about where you might think about some really subtle changes, or in fact, some of those communication strategies that Edwina has outlined. Everyone, have a great day and enjoy your week.